I'd like to be passing retrospective legislation to validate rates that were set unlawfully, but we just need to get on and do it.
I call the Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, it's a pleasure to be giving this speech on the Tasman District Council validation and recovery of certain rates bills. I've had a significant number of meetings with constituents about the bill and this issue. The Tasman District Council is part of the Nelson constituency. About half the people that actually live within Tasman District are constituents of mine, and I've taken a strong interest in this bill over the last 5 or 6 years, where there's been a group of quite aggrieved ratepayers who don't agree with the way in which the Tasman District Council chose to levy them for stormwater rates in the area of both Tata Beach and Liga Bay, a truly beautiful part of the Golden Bay, an area where there are a number of batches and holiday type homes, a place where I've often gone as a family and holidayed. Now, at the core of the issue for that Liga Bay community is that there are different levels of stormwater risk. There are some of those property owners that are at some elevation and overlook Liga Bay, and there are those that are right down by the estuary and beach that are subject to quite a lot more stormwater risk. And at the core of some of the local argument has been, should everybody pay equally relative to the value of their property, or should they be paying a different amount depending on what level of stormwater and flood risk they have? A number of the homeowners have raised concern with the council. They think the rate was levied unfairly. Now, I think for the Parliament, and the view that we on this side of the House has taken, is that we don't want to usurp the job of the Tasman District Council and its community board in Golden Bay to resolve those tensions and those inevitable arguments about where the money should be spent. The real question for us is whether the administrative anomalies in the way in which these rates were struck, and I would note that these are years in which we were not the government, periods all the way through from 2003 to 2008, the Tasman District Council did not follow the right procedural routine for striking those rates. I think there is a legitimate question, and that is when the previous government passed the 2002 Local Government Act, did they invest sufficiently in communicating to councils at both an administrative and an elected officer level? Did they actually put in the necessary resources so there weren't mistakes of this sort made? The fact there weren't just mistakes made in 2003-04, but there were mistakes made in, frankly, every single year following that, suggests that there was an underinvestment in communication and around the new requirements of that 2002 Local Government Act. Now, the question for Parliament is, having had the Tasman District Council, and my colleague noted that the Tasman District Council came to the Select Committee. They were embarrassed by the mistake. They apologised for the mistake. And for Mr Trevor Mallard from the other side of the House would be the last one to be standing up in this House and say, well, he's never made any mistakes during the... Well, the member...
He's an expert on mistakes.
The member and my colleague quite rightly refers to Trevor Mallard as an expert on mistakes, and we're a forgiving government. We're a forgiving government.
Yes.
We're a kind government.
We try.
And in the case of Tasman District Council, there is no question that they were an honest mistake. There's no question from the evidence that the Select Committee heard as to what the intent of the elected council was when they struck each of these rates in the period from 2003 through to 2008. And that is why government members are saying, yes, we acknowledge that there are some grumpy ratepayers. We acknowledge that it is pretty arbitrary in terms of how you allocate the stormwater costs for that Liger Bay and Tarter Beach community, but that to be pragmatic, we need to pass this bill. Now, we need to look at what the counter would be. If we didn't pass this bill, Mr. Speaker, what would be the consequence? There would be a huge administrative burden on the Tasman District Council to go back to each of those ratepayers over each of those 5 years and to then give them a rates refund. Some of those properties have changed hands since, and then to try and find where those owners are. And of course then the council's got the difficulty that it needs to then fill that financial hole. And that would be a cost that would sit on a good number of my constituents in the Nelson electorate who are ratepayers to the Tasman District Council, and that would be a very unsatisfactory outcome. So it makes sound sense for the Parliament to do the generous thing to accept the apology from the Tasman District Council, to ensure that they have got their system sorted so that mistakes of this sort are not repeated, but taking that pragmatic view to allow those rates in that community to stand. Mr. Speaker, I would note that while the focus of the submissions and the angst has been around the issues of rates for the Liger Bay community, there actually are other communities that are also affected by this bill. We are dealing with Riverworks around the community of Mapua. We are dealing with the ASB Bank Aquatic Centre in Richmond, and the way in which the rates were struck in the 2008-9 year. We are dealing with not just rates in 1 year at Tarter Beach and at Liger Bay, but actually over 5 consecutive years. Now, one of the things of which the government does take a sympathetic view to ratepayers, if we look over this period, not just in Tasman District, but across New Zealand, there were excessive rate rises. Over that period, we had rate rises going up by 8-9% every single year, year on, year out. And we would say, on this side of the House, that the previous government was far too cavalier about the cost on ratepayers of that Local Government Act 2002, and that is why this government is making changes to that Act to get a greater degree of financial discipline so that we have councils not contributing to the cost pressures. I was quite pleased to see the latest rates data, Mr. Speaker, which has shown that rate increases over both the last 2 years since this government has advanced local government reforms have come down quite significantly, and I think that is a positive in terms of the underlying tensions from those ratepayers that were concerned about these illegal rates and the ongoing increase that has occurred. So in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, this is an unfortunate bill. It's not the sort of bill that Parliament likes to advance, but it is pragmatic legislation that recognises that there were mistakes made. There was no question as to what the intent of the council was made, that there would be a very significant cost to the ratepayers, not just in Golden Bay or in Liger Bay, but throughout Tasman District if this bill was not to be passed. My view is that Mayor Richard Kempthorne and his council have taken a pretty conciliatory view, that they've apologised to their ratepayers, they've apologised to the Parliament, and that means that the passage of this bill puts right that administrative error in the way that incurs the least ongoing cost to the collective ratepayers of Tasman District. I think there is a challenge for the Tasman District Council to rebuild the confidence, particularly of the people in Liger Bay and Tarter Beach. I do think they need to go back to that community and work through, in the longer term, having raised these rates to ensure that they are spent appropriately, that the money is invested in proper stormwater systems for that Liger Bay and Tarter Beach community particularly, so that those ratepayers who are inevitably had to pay these charges, albeit unlawfully, and now to be made lawful, actually see some of the infrastructure that they would have expected from those rates contributions that they made between 2003 and 2008. So, Mr Speaker, this is a bill that the Parliament should pass in the interests of pragmatism so that the Tasman District Council can get on with its business of trying to provide efficient services for the communities they serve without these sorts of errors being repeated. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Well said. Well said. Too brief, but well said.
I recognise the honourable member, Andrew Williams.
Thank you for recognising me.